or see things a different way, well, it could be because you trust the mainstream media, meaning you do believe what you're supposed to believe, what this world wants you to believe, in which case I think you'll always be missing the truth. What I want to make clear from the start is that you're free to believe whatever you want, as am I. Eddie Bravo was on the Tinfoil Hat podcast and summed it up quite well when he said,
Hey, listen, I'd rather be thought of as an idiot for not trusting the government than a traitor for defending them. I would rather be thought as a moron for not trusting criminals than a sellout and a traitor for defending them.
I don't believe liars, and I don't trust criminals. Once you've lied to me, I no longer see the need to believe anything you say. The difference is I'm not lying to you at any point throughout this film. I'm giving you my 100% honest opinion on the subjects discussed. Agree or disagree, these are my personal beliefs. Space has always been an amazing arena for populist politics and fantasy conceptions. When NASA began, the space pioneer and ex-Nazi SS member Wernher von Braun was an absolute genius at forging public opinion with the ideas of space and space travel. He knew the power of space-related gimmicks. Together with the other dream maker and fantasy extraordinaire Walt Disney, they joined up to greatly sway public opinion by presenting space as a sci-fi fantasy adventure, a reaching for the stars, much like a Disney movie. Wernher von Braun said, "There's no Bucks without Buck Rogers." Of course, Buck Rogers was a fictional space character that debuted in 1928, becoming a very popular comic strip. Then it became a television series. It was so popular that many newspapers launched their own science fiction strips right after. Imitators like Flash Gordon and Speed Spaulding and John Carter of Mars. The adventures of Buck Rogers became an important part of popular culture, and by 1930 Buck Rogers took his rocket ship and left Earth. Buck Rogers has been credited with bringing into popular media the concept of space exploration, following those few before him like Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, and those who came after him like Arthur C. Clarke. So, as Wernher von Braun said, there's no Bucks without Buck Rogers. Let's start there and talk a little bit about the money behind the space industry, because this is a terribly important aspect. Only once you completely understand the financial implications can you begin to understand why and how they continue to get away with going nowhere. First off, NASA receives $56 million a day of taxpayer money. While it may only be 0.5% of the yearly U.S. budget, they also get many other funds from donations, admissions, etc. But here is the most important fact to understand. Think of how big the music industry is worldwide. Enormous, right? Now think of the movie industry, Hollywood and global, even bigger. So where do you think the video game industry and economy rates with those two? What if I told you the video game industry is now more than the music and movie industries combined? Wow. This article states, forget about being a movie star, forget about becoming the next Beyonce. If you want to be rich and famous in the entertainment world, you should start playing video games right now. Gross video game sales have outweighed box office receipts for over 2 decades, and they surpassed home video and theater earnings combined 15 years ago. The video games industry has earned more revenue than the movie and music industries combined every year for the past 8 years. That's right, video games have passed the music and movie industry 15 years ago and have earned more revenue than the movie and music industries combined every year for the past 8 years. In 2018, the video game industry raked in $137 billion. That's $70 billion in mobile, $14 billion in tablet games, $56 billion in smartphone games, $33 billion in PC games, $4 billion in browser PC games, $28 billion in boxed and downloadable PC games, and over $34 billion in console video games, a total of $137 billion for that year. A huge industry compared to the movie industry, which only brought in $43 billion. Even if you include home entertainment and home theater, you still don't reach the video game industry. And music is less than half of the movie industry at only $20.5 billion. Crazy business, huh? Can you imagine one of those industries just going away because people realized it was all a fraud? Well, not really, because people know those industries are entertainment industries, selling fantasies, right? So where do you think the space industry stands compared to music, movies, and video games? What if I told you it is almost double all of them combined? Shocked? Well, you should be. The space industry was at $385 billion in 2017. Video games were at $137. Video games plus the movie industry, plus the home entertainment industry, plus the music industry don't even reach the space industry. So now you can start to see why presidents stand behind it, why it is needed, because it makes so much money and creates so many jobs. Whether anyone goes anywhere or not, As long as you believe that they have gone somewhere or eventually will, the space economy continues to grow and thrive. So where do we go, Obama? The moon? Mars?
You and I know this is a false choice. We have to fix our economy. We need to close our deficits, but for pennies on the dollar, the space program has fueled jobs and entire industries. For pennies on the dollar, the space program has improved our lives, advanced our society, strengthened our economy, and inspired generations of Americans. And I have no doubt that NASA can continue to fulfill this role.
Both of these articles claim that the space industry will soon be a $1 trillion industry. From Space News, it says, forecasts that predict the space industry to grow to $1 trillion by the 2040s will require the development of new markets, even with the modest annual growth rates needed to achieve the goal. A panel session on June 26th at Space Frontier Foundation's New Space 2018 conference here noted that several reports in the last year by investment banks predicted that the global space economy, currently valued at about $350 billion, could grow to $1 trillion or more in the 2040s. And from the Office of Space Commerce, it says, today the global space economy is roughly a $400 billion economy, of which about 80% is commercial activity, and the United States claims a little less than half of that commercial activity. We used to think about space activities being concentrated in a few key areas, in Florida and California, and in this great state of Texas. But the fact is that there's not an area of this country these days that isn't deeply affected by the space industry. That's very exciting, and it is a very promising time for the space industry as we have the convergence of leadership, finance, and technology that is creating opportunity at unprecedented speed. We used to think about space as an area where some new development was a decade away, but in fact these days it might be just 2 years or 2 months away. Of course, always in the future. Not here yet, but it'll be here soon.
Hi, I'm George Jetson, and I live in the 21st century. That's Elroy. You have to watch him or he'll track up the ceiling. Here I'm dropping Judy off at school. Blondes away! Oh, that's Jeannie, my wife. Rosie!
Coming, sir.
Are you starting to see NASA's role yet? Can you tell what importance NASA has? Make money, create jobs, inspire Americans, inspire the world, sell fantasy, but going anywhere isn't the important thing. Whether it's in 1980 for those around in 1960, or in 2000 for those of us who were around in 1980, or in 2020 for those people living in the year 2000, or in 2030 or 2040 for those of us living now. We will be going to Mars, we will return to the moon, we will launch a James Webb telescope, we will land and mine asteroids, we will redirect an incoming meteor, we will send another rover to Mars, we will have a colony, we will have a lunar base and launching pad, we will have a drone fly above the moons of Saturn. We just need more money and more time. We will continue to provide jobs, we will continue to inspire, we will continue to innovate, and we will continue doing what we've always done since 1958. Going nowhere. So who knows about the deception, you ask? Do the presidents know? To be honest, I have no idea. It's just another lie that is told to the world population. One of the many, many deceptions, and who knows about it? I'm not exactly sure. But now, if you just think about it and look at what NASA has really provided, inspiration, you'll see it doesn't really matter who knows. Who knows if fluoride is harmful? Do dentists? Well, some, but they were taught it is essential to health. Do the presidents know? I don't have a clue. But all that's important is that I know and remove it from my life, much like I've done with the NASA storytelling. I know they aren't on Mars, and I know they aren't going there. I know no man has walked on the moon, and no man will. I've come to grips on that reality. Maybe some presidents know, others may not, but all of them realize the importance of telling people we have gone and will go again. Carl Sagan said, "One of the saddest lessons of history is this. If we've been bamboozled long enough, we tend to reject any evidence of the bamboozle. We're no longer interested in finding out the truth. The bamboozle has captured us. It's simply too painful to acknowledge, even to ourselves, that we've been taken. Once you have given a charlatan power over you, you almost never get it back." Again, to realize this fraud, you have to first accept that you've been lied to, and are being lied to. What will that take? Well, I'm not sure exactly. The evidence is everywhere. How about the quote by William Casey? And despite what you may hear elsewhere, it has been verified by a source who was there that the then CIA director William Casey actually said in 1981, "We will know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false." Despite Casey being under investigation by Congress for being involved in a major disinformation plot involving the overthrow of Libya's Gaddafi in 1981, and despite Casey arguing on the record that the CIA should have a legal right to spread disinformation via the mainstream news that same year, this quote continues to be argued by people who weren't there and apparently cannot believe a CIA director would ever say such a thing. Well, but spreading disinfo is precisely what the CIA would and did do. This 1975 clip of testimony during a House Intelligence Committee hearing has the agency admitting on record that the CIA creates and uses disinformation against the American people.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to a major circulation American journal?
We do have people who submit pieces to American journals.
Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks?
This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
At CBS, we had been contacted by the CIA. As a matter of fact, by the time I became the head of the whole news and public affairs operation in 1954, the ships had been established, and I was told about them.
Or maybe this Bush press conference where he admits that the federal government has a long-standing practice of using prepackaged news reports and calling them news, when the government themselves has created them.
Told us you had ordered your administration to cease and desist on payments to journalists to promote your agenda. You cited the need for ethical concerns and the need for a bright line between the press and the government. Your administration continues to make the use of video news releases, which are prepackaged news stories sent to television stations, fully aware that some or many of these stations will air them without any disclaimer that they are produced by the government. Comptroller General of the United States this week said that raises ethical questions. Does it raise ethical questions about the use of government money to produce stories about the government that wind up being aired with no disclosure that they were produced by the government?
There is a Justice Department opinion that says these pieces are within the law so long as they're based upon facts, not advocacy. And I expect our agencies to adhere to that ruling, to that Justice Department opinion. This has been a long-standing practice of the federal government to use these types of videos. The Agricultural Department, as I understand, has been using these videos for a long period of time. The Defense Department, other departments have been doing so. It's important that they be based upon the guidelines set out by the Justice Department. Now, I think it'd be helpful if local stations then disclose to their viewers if that's, that this was based upon a factual report and they chose to use it. But evidently in some cases that's not the case. So anyway.
The administration could guarantee that's happening by including that language in the prepackaged report.
Yeah, look, oh, you mean a disclosure? I'm George W. Bush and I...
Well, some way to make sure it couldn't air without the disclosure that you believe is so vital.
Ken, there's a procedure that we're going to follow, and the local stations ought to, if there's a deep concern about that, ought to tell their viewers what they're watching. Yes, sir.
Or maybe you need to hear an apology directly from Clinton about the thousands of government-sponsored experiments performed on American citizens without their approval.
This report I received today is a monumental document in more ways than one. But it is a very, very important piece of America's history, and it will shape America's future in ways that will make us a more honorable, more successful, and more ethical country. What this committee learned, I would like to review today with a little more detail than Dr. Faden said, because I think it must be engraved on our national memory. Thousands of government-sponsored experiments did take place at hospitals, universities, and military bases around our nation. The goal was to understand the effects of radiation exposure on the human body. While most of the tests were ethical by any standards, some were unethical, not only by today's standards, but by the standards of the time in which they were conducted. They failed both the test of our national values and the test of humanity. Informed consent means your doctor tells you the risk of the treatment you are about to undergo. In too many cases, informed consent was withheld. Americans were kept in the dark about the effects of what was being done to them. The deception extended beyond the test subjects themselves to encompass their families and the American people as a whole. For these experiments were kept secret, and they were shrouded not for a compelling reason of national security, but for the simple fear of embarrassment, and that was wrong. So today, on behalf of another generation of American leaders and another generation of American citizens, the United States of America offers a sincere apology to those of our citizens who were subjected to these experiments, to their families, and to their communities. When the government does wrong, we have a moral responsibility to admit it. The duty we owe to one another to tell the truth and to protect our fellow citizens from excesses like these is one we can never walk away from. Our government failed in that duty, and it offers an apology to the survivors and their families, and to all the American people who must be able to rely upon the United States to keep its word, to tell the truth, and to do the right thing.
Perhaps you need to read the released CIA documents stating that the CIA considered enlisting mafia gunmen from Sam Giancana's Chicago outfit to take out Castro. Luckily, Robert Kennedy was opposed to that plan, worrying that such a service rendered would make Giancana difficult to prosecute in the future. And as part of the anti-Castro Operation Mongoose, the CIA floated the idea of an Operation Northwood-style false flag attack on American soil in order to discredit Castro. We could develop a communist Cuban terror campaign in the Miami area, in other Florida cities, and even in Washington. We could sink a boatload of Cubans en route to Florida, real or simulated. We could foster attempts on lives of Cuban refugees in the American states, even to the extent of wounding in instances to be widely publicized. Exploding a few plastic bombs in carefully chosen spots, the arrest of a Cuban agent, and the release of prepared documents substantiating Cuban involvement also would be helpful in projecting the idea of an irresponsible government. Which government do you think is irresponsible? And lastly, we can see that the CIA and NASA have been up to no good from the start. After Francis Gary Powers was shot down over the Soviet Union during a CIA spy flight on May 1, 1960, NASA issued a press release with a cover story about a U-2 conducting weather research that may have strayed off course after the pilot reported difficulties with his oxygen equipment. To bolster the cover-up, a U-2 was quickly painted in NASA markings with a fictitious NASA serial number and put on display for the news media at the NASA Flight Research Center at Edwards Air Force Base on May 6, 1960. The very next day, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev exposed the cover-up by revealing that the pilot had been captured and confessed, and espionage equipment had been recovered from the wreckage. It was not until April 2, 1971, that NASA received 2 U-2 aircraft for high-altitude research. These, of course, were the first U-2s to actually be operated by NASA, as opposed to the CIA or the U.S. Air Force. Now, all of this is meant to show you that you've been lied to, and you have every right to question what liars and criminals tell you, especially when they put it in textbooks and force it into the minds of children and put it in the mainstream news daily, which, of course, is made up of only some CIA employees. So the lies are obvious and the lies are many, but do you still believe them about space? Well, I don't. And now we can begin with the presidents. So why the presidents? Well, the president is not only commander-in-chief, he's the commander-in-chief of NASA. NASA is an administrative function in our government, and it reports directly to the President of the United States. It is the president and his staff that set NASA's agenda and request the budgetary resources needed to carry it out. So no one other than the president ultimately has greater influence over the direction and the pace of the U.S. space efforts. Congress then has to approve it, but normally makes little to no changes to the presidential recommendations. When it comes to the presidents, in my mind, the job is pretty simple. You toe the line, you make a splash if you need it for re-election, celebrate the so-called achievements to show that you care, speak softly of tragedies, but ultimately you can't make NASA do anything or go anywhere. Up first is Dwight D. Eisenhower, president from 1953 to 1961. His vice president, of course, was Richard Nixon, hand-selected by Prescott Bush. He announced in 1955 that the U.S. would launch a satellite a few years in the future. I guess it takes a long time. But he was beat to the punch when Russia launched Sputnik in 1957. They say this is why he signed legislation that started NASA, but he wasn't too worried about Sputnik as he called it one small ball in the air. But the public was scared, so NASA to the rescue. He didn't think we needed a civilian space company, thought everything should go through the DoD, but Nixon and LBJ convinced him. Remember, the Texas connection. Prescott handpicked Nixon, and LBJ was the Senate Majority Leader. Eisenhower believed anything space should be all DoD, so much so that he decided the astronauts should be all military. Makes sense, right? Guys who have taken an oath of secrecy. But he saw what Russian propaganda had done, and so followed the leader. Calmed the public fears with NASA and his calming voice from space in 1958. The world got to hear his voice from a tape recorder on a satellite. Hilarious. Listen in.
We have on tape or recorded the voice of the President of the United States as it's being broadcast to Earth from our great satellite put into orbit last night. Through Radio Press, WBAI, and this particular